We're going to talk some more. Let's go for this political arithmetic. And let us bring in CNBC contributor and former Labor Secretary Robert Reich, author of Super Capitalism. We have former Undersecretary of State Jim Glassman, who's president of the World Growth Institute, and Jonathan Ticini of the Labor Research Association. All right, very spirited. Robert Reich, I want to come to you on your wonderful column today, but just on this narrower question of political arithmetic, Jimmy Glassman. You wrote a piece in the Washington Post, just as Robert wrote one in the Financial Times. But your piece, Jim, talked about this political arithmetic. I don't get it. If you have more, if you're a bigger creditor, shouldn't you have gotten the bigger ownership piece, Jim?
Yeah, one would think so. Actually, my piece was in the esteemed New York Times.
Oh,
but
sorry.
That was close enough.
Sorry.
No, look, the union got an even better deal than that. They had a $20 billion claim through the Health Trust, and they got $6.5 billion in preferred stock, $2.5 billion in cash paid out over 8 years, and then this 17.5% interest. I mean, that's roughly, they were treated 4 times better than the creditors, so from the bondholders. So even if you said that they ought to be treated equally, they got a 4 times better deal. The UAW was absolutely critical to Barack Obama's victory. They supported him before Iowa, and whatever it is in reality, it looks like the worst kind of political payoff of the sort that you may see in the worst kind of third world corrupt country. And that's my main concern. My main concern is over the long term, this kind of deal discourages long-term investors from putting money into the United States for the reason that they used to do it. Partly because we have good workers, partly because we have good management, but partly because we have a solid rule of law where we keep politics out of these decisions.
There's a big story running up on Reuters on this point. This analyst named Gorman went back. It turns out now the bonds of the union-based corporations around the U.S., their spreads or differences, their interest rate differences, have widened substantially against treasuries because of the undermining of the rule of law. So let me ask Jonathan Ticini, you heard Jim Glassman criticize this as essentially a political bailout of the UAW, Jonathan.
Well, first of all, he's totally incorrect about the UAW supporting Obama before Iowa. They didn't make an endorsement until far later. There may have been local people of the UAW supported Obama, but it was absolutely not the case that the International supported Obama. There was, in fact, a debate about that, but that's neither here nor there for now.
State UAW in Iowa.
So the fact is that I guess I'm not as concerned that this was a political decision because, let's face it, what did that mean? It meant trying to preserve the jobs of tens of thousands of hardworking Americans. When we talk about why people look at America as a great society and a great economy, it's really about the building of the middle class, the fact that people, if you keep your nose clean, you can make a decent living, and that's really what this is about. If you go back to when this debate first started, 6 or 8 months ago, one of the reasons the government stepped in the beginning to give at least a little bit of money to the GM and the other auto companies is because there was a great fear that if they didn't step in, it would further the collapse of the economy.
So
it was already in
crisis. Anyway, Jonathan. I mean, in truth, I hear you, my friend. But my point is, you go back, you look at this story. We wound up losing the jobs anyway. If I'm not mistaken, Jonathan, correct me if I'm wrong, because I know you're on top of the numbers better. But basically, domestically, the union jobs for General Motors, what, a little less than 50,000, and that's going to be cut down in half to about 25,000. I mean, you compare that to some of the great new economy companies like Walmart, Microsoft, Cisco, Home Depot. It's just a drop in the bucket. It doesn't matter. That's why stocks are dissing this whole story, Jonathan.
Well, I'm actually glad that you brought up Walmart versus General Motors. Walmart is not the version of the great U.S. economy that I believe in. Walmart pays its workers very poorly, is extremely anti-union. There's not a single store of Walmart that's unionized, does not pay its workers health care. There are no. Well,
and that's why thousands of people line up for jobs, Jonathan.
Larry,
thousands of people line up for jobs, and they have retail health clinics. They're now giving them health care.
If you consider success giving someone a job that they cannot retire on, that they're basically living at the poverty level, versus a middle-class livelihood, which is what the UAW provided, what a General Motors job was, I don't believe that's the kind of America that most people support.
All right, so the
that's
issue
is America, but that's not what most people would like.
Just the issue is whether there's no job or some job, because in General Motors there's not going to be any jobs. Robert Reich, in your FT article that I admired very much, it's clear to me the Kudlow report, free market thinking, has had some impact, low these many years. And you basically...
I'm having a little bit of impact on you, Larry, a little bit over the years.
Actually, you know what? You have had impact on me. I admit to that because you're a fine fella and a smart fella. But you basically are saying GM's going out of business anyway. Can you elaborate?
Well, look, here's the confusion, and I think that Jonathan and Jim kind of typify and exemplify that confusion. GM is going to be losing half of its workforce. The estimate that I have is it's going to go down to about 38,000 direct employees by the end of next year. Now, that's from, 460,000 in the 1960s. So we have a tiny little shell of what was formerly GM. What exactly is the public purpose behind all of this? I don't quite get it, and I'm not sure also that I understand what Fritz Henderson will be accountable for, or to whom he will be accountable. The whole thing just doesn't quite add up.
Would you have preferred, Robert, that they put it into Chapter 11? And, you know, I say this partly in jest, but partly very seriously. I believe, here's the serious part, I believe that we have the wherewithal, the technology, the brains, the entrepreneurship in this country to produce great American cars. I believe that from the bottom of my heart.
Larry, here's what
I think the management had to change, and the union structure had to change. I say if they had gone into Chapter 11 and sold off the assets, somebody like Wilbur Ross could have put it back together again like he did the steel companies.
Well, here's what I would have preferred. There are a lot of potentially good technician-like jobs, potentially good blue-collar jobs in the emerging energy industry. There are a lot of new blue-collar and white-collar jobs that are going to be created in the recovery. I would rather that some of that money, rather than $50–60 billion, go into kind of preserving an old entity that's shrinking and may disappear in 10 years, rather than put it into helping workers adapt to the new economy.
Go ahead,
well,
Jim.
it's easy for Robert to talk, sitting at his perch in the University of California as a professor, to sort of toss off these jobs and say, let's not spend this money elsewhere. We're talking about thousands of people who are still going to have jobs. GM may be shrinking, but we're trying to save communities and real jobs. Now, we could argue back and forth about this.
Isn't history...
Let me make one point about something that we should not forget. We got into this position partly because of the disaster of the lack of national health care. Tens of billions of dollars of cost in these auto companies that brought us to this point would have been eliminated had we had a national single-payer health care system. At least,
Jonathan,
if we could
I agree with you on that.
At least if we could
I absolutely agree. I agree with you on that.
Jim Glassman, do you agree that... All right, hang on.
No, we could learn from this disaster and push forward with national health care. We'd learn something.
We're a little pressed for time. Jimmy Glassman, I want to ask you this. Would a nationalized government-run health care system have solved the problem? And what is the history of governments, particularly in Europe, and I'm thinking of Italy and England in particular, essentially bailing out distressed companies? What's the history here, and is nationalization of health care the real answer?
Well, first of all, the history of bailing out distressed companies by governments is terrible because governments have different objectives from businesses. As far as national health care is concerned, look at the automobile companies that produce cars in the United States, do very well at it, and are continuing to grow. Those are companies that are based outside the United States. And in 2010, those companies will produce more cars in the United States than American auto companies. That's a question, it seems to me, of management. And it's a question of the behavior of the union. That's the difference. So I wouldn't
Jim,
throw
this is
out,
exactly, this is a very important look. Let me just build on this, because Fritz Henderson may be a terrific guy, but he's been with GM for 25 years.
I agree,
if you want
Bob.
really a fundamental change in management, you've got to have somebody who is brand new, who thinks
differently. This is not going to work out. I'm sorry.
That's why Chapter 11 would have been the right answer.
I agree with Larry.
Fellas, just one quick runaround on this. I am disturbed also. The government now, which is owner, is also regulator. So the CAFE fuel standards are going to create these little green compact cars, Jim Glassman, but they're not going to be available to use global markets overseas, not Mexico, not China. That's according to the deal. Now, that's not only bailing out a distressed company, that's protectionist.
Right, and I think that's the kind of thing that's going to continue to happen, that the government is going to see that its interest is in making GM profitable, even if it means hurting consumers by doing things that are protectionist, or by putting more of taxpayer dollars into this institution.